Welcome to Stories from the Village of Nothing Much. Like easy listening, but for fiction. I'm Kathryn Nicolai. I write and read all the stories you'll hear on the Village of Nothing Much. Audio engineering and sound design is by Bob Wittersheim. In our show notes, you'll find links to our ad-free premium version, our other shows, and our merch and partner products. We just launched a really cute set with a mini Nothing Much Happens coloring book, colored pencils, and a special coloring-themed story. The link is in our notes. Welcome to your soft landing, my friend. If you want to be reminded of the good things that are very much still a part of our world, or just hear a kind, calm voice telling you something soothing and happy, I got you. These stories all come from my bedtime story podcast, Nothing Much Happens. If you need help falling and staying asleep, find it on any podcast app. Our stories focus on simple, everyday life, finding more joy and satisfaction in small things by feeling them fully. They all take place in what I call the Village of Nothing Much, and many of our storylines intersect and overlap. I'll tell you more about that at the end of the episodes, if you're interested in staying around. But first, let's take a deep breath in through the nose and sigh it out. Nice. Do that one more time. Breathe in. Out with sound. Good. Our stories today indulge us in some simple springtime pleasures. We'll start with sunrise at the cabin, with coffee in our cup and a dog by our side. Then we'll tackle a bit of spring cleaning as we empty the shelves, wipe them down, and restock them with favorite treats and staples in the pantry. Finally, we'll straddle the edge of the season as March makes up her mind in Out Like a Lamb. Sunrise at the cabin. I'm not sure how it started. I've never been an early riser, nor am I a night owl. I like to go to bed early and stay tucked in till late. But recently I've been waking up before the sun, rested and ready, wanting to get up and get going. At first I resisted, flipped my pillow to the cool side, and tried to slip back into a dream, or propped myself up and read my book, hoping my eyes would grow heavy again. Then I realized that, whatever the cause of this resetting of my internal clock, I could take advantage of it, enjoy it rather than try to wind the hands back. And since then, I've become a sunrise enthusiast, watching it from different locations and with a growing appreciation for the quiet optimism it inspires in me. Today was no different. I woke with no alarm, just a feeling of being replete, done with sleep and bed, and crept quietly around in the darkness so as not to wake the household. I put on thick socks, swapped my thin pajamas for warm sweats, and felt around on the bedside table till I found my glasses. I kept to the edges of the stairs to minimize squeaking as I came down into the kitchen and padded over to the coffee maker. As I ran water in the sink and rinsed the carafe, I peered out into the yard. Our cabin is set at the edge of a valley, land dropping away in front of us, then rising up and up on the other side. More than a hill, but not quite a mountain. There are a scattering of houses on the winding roads, and a few had lit windows glowing in the early morning. I wondered if they too were spooning grounds into their coffee filters, smelling the scent of the brew. When the pot was half full, I poured some into my favorite mug and pulled my hood up over my head. I stepped into my garden clogs and slid the door to the deck open. It was cool, still early in the spring, but not cold, and as I stepped out and was about to close the door behind me, I heard the jingle of my dog's collar. I waited a moment as he came sleepily down the stairs and outside with me. He stopped to lean against my leg and let me rub his head, then ran out ahead of me. We tromped across the yard, the first birds of the morning clearing their throats in their nests above us and singing. At the far edge of the yard, just before the drop-off, we had a fire pit, ringed with Adirondack chairs, and I brushed a few dried leaves from the seat of one and sat down. My dog brought me a stick he'd found and wagged his tail in the low light, waiting for me to toss it. I threw it back toward the house and heard his paws thudding into the soft ground as he chased after it. I sighed, leaned back in my chair, bringing the cup close to my face and watching the steam lift into the air. The light was changing around me, so subtle that it was difficult to notice unless I paid close attention. I paid close attention. I noticed that I could see the outline of tree trunks and a few of the bigger branches, though their tops were still lost in the darkness. My dog returned, lay down beside the chair, and catching the stick between his paws, gnawed at it as I waited for the sun to rise. It would come up nearly in the center of the valley. Not exactly the center, a little to one side, and I liked that. Lopsided, imperfect things felt lived in and less fragile than the ones that lined up just perfectly. The horizon was glowing brighter, and the sky above it more blue. My senses were wide awake, taking in all that they could, and it made me feel calm and content. I'd heard someone ask once why being present was such a big deal, why work at it. The answer they'd gotten was simple and rang true to me since I'd taken up watching sunrises. When our minds and bodies are in the same place, we feel better, we act more reasonably, we make more sense. This morning ritual, the dog chewing his stick beside me, the changing lines of light and color, the taste of my coffee, it made sense. Helped me make sense of myself and my day. Finally, the sun crested over the land in the distance, and instantly I smiled. If every stitch of land all over the world has its own special moment each day, is singled out to be seen and honored, this was ours. I set my cup on the arm of my chair, stood and walked closer to the drop-off, looking down into the valley that was filling up with bright light. The houses on the hill, whose windows were lit while my coffee had been brewing, now just reflected sun. I turned my face to it, let it shine through my closed lids and revive me. After a few minutes, again feeling replete, I turned and whistled for my dog, and he came ambling over, his stick a bit smaller but still in his mouth. I tossed it for him again, and bent to gather up a few more broken branches and dried out seed pods. Today would be a good day to clear the yard of fallen kindling and brush and pile it high in the fire pit for tonight. The days were getting longer and warmer, now that we were past the equinox, and I liked to be outside for as much of it as possible. Just as I was dropping the wood into the pit, and thinking that a second cup of coffee would hit the spot, I heard the window above the sink creak open, and a voice call out, "Breakfast is ready." "Coming," I called back, and we turned back to the house. The pantry. I'd been walking past it for a while. The pantry door, shut to hide the messy mix of bags and boxes, cans and bottles. It was a chore I'd been putting off for a rainy day. We all have a room like that, right? Or sometimes it is the trunk of the car or an overstuffed bag. A collection of things that needs to be sorted and dealt with. I put it off even though I knew that having it organized and clean would feel so good. The space would feel inviting and calm again, and I'd be happy to open the door and scan the shelves rather than avoid it. Still, sometimes as humans, we do the opposite of the thing we know we should. And that's not a moral sort of should, just the I'd feel better if sort. So today I decided I couldn't walk past it one more time. I flicked on the lights in the kitchen and cleared off the counters. I took the pot of hyacinths from the table and set it on the bookshelf in the living room. I'd need a good bit of space for this. Then I opened the pantry door and let out a heavy sigh. It was only a closet, slightly wider inside than the door itself, and not very deep, but every shelf, from top to bottom, was crammed with cans of beans, bottles of herbs and garlic salt, boxes of pasta and ramen, as well as quite a bit of random stuff that had no business being in a pantry. Were those winter gloves up there? The light bulbs I bought 3 years ago that were the wrong size? Packages of cheesecloth back when I was definitely going to start making my own nut milk a couple times a week. That part that came off that thing that I thought I should save in case I needed it again. Considering that I couldn't remember anymore what the thing had been, I guessed I'd been wrong. I started to unload the shelves onto my kitchen counters and table. I remembered a podcast I'd been listening to earlier, a fascinating history of a big city I'd always dreamed of visiting, and thought it would make the perfect companion to my work. I turned it on and set it playing between the boxes. While I made trip after trip between the pantry and the counters, I listened and imagined the great buildings described. The cobblestone streets, the view from the observation deck on the tallest building, the open-air markets in the squares. Gosh, how much I would have come home with if I could have visited those stalls. Already, just from our own shops and markets, I'd collected a dozen kinds of hot sauce, spices I had no idea what to do with, pickles and vinegars and sauces that overwhelmed the surface of the table. Well, some of these things were years old, dust on their caps and their best buy dates, so long past they were illegible. I imagined I had better be safe rather than sorry, so bottles were emptied and rinsed to go into the recycling bin. Once the pantry was empty, it got a solid top-to-bottom cleaning. I scrubbed the surfaces till they shone, and that sticky ring of pomegranate molasses on the bottom shelf finally dissolved and disappeared. I swept and mopped the floor and found a few random pasta shapes, dog food nuggets, and even though I've never worn one in my life, a couple of bobby pins. They just appear in places. While the shelves and floor dried, I started to sort what was left into categories. Baking supplies were grouped by the sink, and I was excited to find I had almond and orange extract. I'd have to make something with those. I had a truly impressive collection of dried beans. I had split peas, both green and yellow, and all colors of lentils, then fat lima beans as big as my thumbnail and pretty calypso and yellow eye beans. I had many boxes of pasta and noodles, udon and ramen, farfalle, bucatini, and tiny pastina that I used in soup on freezing days or when I felt under the weather. I started to arrange things back on their shelves. I tried to imagine where things should go based on how often I used them, and was excited when a can or box fit perfectly into the spot I'd left for it. I knew it was fussy, but when I put the cans of beans and tomatoes and hearts of palm back into place, I turned them so that the labels lined up identically, just like in the grocery store. I guess I was playing shop owner, like I had with a playset when I was little. But what's wrong with that? The order made me feel calm. And if our spaces can help us feel that way, it's worth the effort. I found a few sturdy cardboard boxes, nice ones that gifts had come in, and used them to hold the small bits that would otherwise fall all over the place. I slotted snack packs of fig cookies into one, with little packets of almonds and cashews beside it. Into a tall jar, I poured a bag of small coconut candies wrapped in foil and screwed on the lid. Lining my shelves like this, little snacks in easy reach, treats as well as staples. It felt like caring for the little kid part of me. There was plenty here, as in abundance, more than enough, and I could just go and reach for what I needed. And that was a really lovely, safe feeling. Parenting doesn't stop when we become adults. We just take over from others, the work of continually raising ourselves. Now I wondered again why I'd waited to put these shelves into order. I deserved this. On the highest shelf, I put away clean vases, ready for spring flowers, and a stack of cookbooks that, and here I vowed, and hoped it would be true, I would start to actually cook from. I'd found a handful of little screw-in hooks in the garage, and I screwed them into the edge of that top shelf to hang herbs and braided garlic from. All I had for now was a small posy of lavender that a friend had gifted me a few weeks back. But I slipped its twine wrap over the hook and stood back to admire what I had done. Clean, organized, more than enough to keep my plate full and flavored for quite a while. Out like a lamb. March is wild and ever-changing. Sweet, mild spring 1 hour, a howling gale of snow and ice the next. I liked her unpredictability, how unapologetic she was when she turned on a dime and changed herself completely in an afternoon. I'd heard once that each person is a string of DNA that would take over a century to recite. So I imagine that if we feel complicated at times, like we hold zones of temperate and inclement weather within ourselves, that they sometimes overlap and emerge on their own schedule, well, that adds up. The morning had come in like a lion. When I'd pushed aside the curtains in my bedroom, I'd found a few inches of fresh snow spread over the yard, and more falling fast behind it. The winter aconite, with its tiny yellow flowers that had appeared a week before around the roots of the pine trees, were covered with white. And while they were beautiful, I had to admit this snowfall was as well. It slowed me down in a real, literal way. I stopped, breathed, just spent time looking. I'd had a plan in the back of my mind to dress and head into town, to spend the morning running errands. But suddenly none of that sounded pressing or appealing, and if the roads were slick, it seemed a silly risk to take in order to return some library books and stand in line at the post office. No, I should stay tucked in at home, bundle up, and enjoy watching the snow come down. It hadn't really taken much time to convince myself of this. I was still standing in front of the window with the curtain in my hand. A gust of wind blew a thick wave of flakes against the panes, and I could feel the chill of it on my skin. I could get back into bed. That was always a lovely option. But I thought about another that I rarely took, but would feel so good right now. A morning bath. Oh, a morning bath. It sets the perfect tone for a day when you don't have to rush off to anything. It says, today we are going slow. I stepped into the bathroom and opened the tap over the tub. In the cabinet, I looked through the bottles and jars. I had some Epsom salts, good for soaking when my body was achy, as well as a jar a friend had gifted me, with rose petals and grains of lavender mixed into the salts. It smelled wonderful, but last time I used it, I'd been picking the lavender out of my hair for a few days. Instead, I reached for the bottle of pearly bubble bath and trickled a stream of it into the steaming water. As the tub filled, I got a fresh towel and washcloth from the linen closet, my book from the bedside table, and a tall glass of water from the kitchen. It's strange what feels indulgent to you at different stages of your life. When I was younger, it wouldn't have been staying home to take a bath on a Saturday morning, but here I was. Maybe it is a gift of aging, a growing understanding of what was enough, and the capacity to enjoy it when you have it. In that first minute in the hot water, my mind went peacefully quiet. I wasn't thinking much of anything, just feeling the heat and the relaxation in my muscles. I stretched out in the tub and closed my eyes. I could hear the wind blowing around the house, and I thought about the squirrels and rabbits digging deeper into their dens, curling around one another for warmth. I picked up my book and read. When the water started to feel a little cool, I just turned the hot tap back on and let it run till it was piping again. I sipped water, soaked up my washcloth, and scrubbed, and eventually felt ready to get out. As I reached for my giant bath towel and wrapped it around me, I had a memory of being helped out of the tub as a child, being wrapped in a warm towel, and how safe and happy it had made me feel. I smiled at myself in the steamy mirror. I'd taken over that job of being the steward of my own happiness and safety. And while I hadn't been very good at it at the beginning, it had taken practice and unlearning some things. I now was adept. I protected me. I was safe with me. I was happy with me. I pulled on a robe and stepped back into the bedroom to peer out of the window. To my surprise, the sun was shining, and the wind had dropped to nothing. The trees stood still, dripping in the sunlight, and the sidewalks were already free of snow. I cracked the window and leaned down to the sill to breathe in the air. It wasn't warm exactly, but I thought I could smell the sunlight in it, and it was inviting. As I dressed and combed my hair, the sunlight grew brighter, cutting into my rooms and warming my wood floors with its rays. By the time I was pulling on my shoes and thinking about an early lunch, all the morning snow was gone, and when I opened up my front door, birdsong rang from the treetops in my yard. I chuckled at March and her changeable ways, zipped up my jacket, and set out in search of something tasty. I'd been so ready to spend the day curled up at home, but now I wanted to be out in the world, enjoying the warmth till March took another left turn. There was a cafe on the corner, built into a little brick building, and their pots of pansies were still dusted with snow as I walked up and pulled open the door. They made excellent sandwiches and soups, and there were always a few empty tables and booths to slide into. I found one near the front window and sat down, unzipping my jacket and feeling the sunshine on my face. On special, they had a roasted cauliflower sandwich with avocado and tahini sauce served on toasted marble rye with house-made chips and ginger iced tea. It had my name all over it, and after I ordered it, I sat back and watched people walking out on the street. By tonight, the winter could be back in full force, icy with fresh snow, or we may be headed into a few days of sun and warmth. I guess in some ways, it didn't really matter. I could find ways to enjoy whatever came. Spring is coming, slowly and steadily, to the village in these episodes. And as I write this, still in the depths of winter, I find it a welcome and hopeful thing just to think of. We're expecting a snowstorm of 7 or 8 inches today at Nothing Much Happens headquarters, and another of about the same size in 3 more days. So the idea of sitting on an Adirondack chair in the cool spring air, no snow anywhere, just leaves and grass and light. Yes, please. These cabin stories have been part of the village for years now, and we check in with this family once or twice a season. In the first months of the pandemic, I wrote a story about sneaking off to the cabin, a feeling of being safely tucked out of the way. It's called The Hideaway, Season 5, Episode 7 of Nothing Much Happens. And it definitely came from a feeling of wanting that myself. And since then, this family, who used to come and go to this little A-frame cabin, seemed to have moved in there full time. I think that felt like a nod to the way lots of our habits changed in 2020, and some of them didn't change back. This narrator talks about the feeling of comfort in the imperfect. I am not a perfectionist. Truly, being a perfectionist sounds like so much work. And I just don't ever like working that hard. I know for some people it's not that simple. They'd like to set down their perfectionism, at least from time to time, and it isn't easily discarded. In which case, I think practicing helps, and finding beauty in the imperfect. You might have heard of the term wabi-sabi in this regard. Listen to its definition. It's so beautiful. Taken from the Japanese words wabi, which translates to less is more, and sabi, which means attentive melancholy. Wabi-sabi refers to an awareness of the transient nature of earthly things, and a corresponding pleasure in the things that bear the mark of this impermanence. That definition was written by Andrew Juniper. This narrator also brought up some simple ideas of mindfulness, and I just wanted to remind you that I have a podcast called First This. It's linked in our notes, with over 150 episodes of 10-minute guided meditation. I was a yoga and meditation teacher for over 20 years, and I focus on making the practice easy to understand and apply to your daily life. That show never has ads on it. We don't make any money on it. It's just meant to be a useful thing in the world, and I hope that you might find it so. From the sunrise at the cabin, we went inside for some spring cleaning, though this is not the same narrator as the previous tale. This story got a big response from listeners when it came out on Nothing Much Happens. A lot of people could relate to the relief of organizing something, that feeling of calm that comes after a long put-off task is completed. I often look for spring cleaning chores that don't feel too onerous to put into my stories. So we never scrub toilets, but we often clean out a closet. Small, manageable, not unpleasant is the sweet spot, I think. This narrator is the same as the one in the story The Hyacinth, Season 9, Episode 10 of Nothing Much Happens, which is also a really nice, calm spring episode. And if you're in the market for a good history podcast, like the one described in the episode, I recommend the Bowery Boys podcast. We've got it linked in our notes. They explore the history of New York City, and I always feel like I am on a tour when I listen to them. Oh, the dried beans. I felt called out by that, and I wrote it. I am a sucker for dried beans. I think they are so pretty, and they frequently have cool names, and they don't cost barely anything, so I have a lot of them. And I try to employ a one in, one out rule, but I don't try very hard. Have you ever watched those restocking videos? When someone restocks their pantry or fridge all neatly and with lots of yummy snacks? I find them to be kind of healing, to be honest. Growing up, I experienced some food scarcity, and then as a teenager, lived in an ingredient-only household. And listen, my folks were just trying to do the best that they could as they worked long hours and they had the information that they had, but nobody gets out of childhood without some hang-ups or dents. And watching a pantry shelf be filled up with fig bars and treats and snacks, Just acknowledging hunger and not making every dietary decision a moral one, it's truly helped me. My own pantry, by the way, is like the one at the beginning of the story, not the end. Again, not a perfectionist. And finally, we ended with a quickly changing day in March. I highly recommend a morning bath, if you can. If we get all the snow and are snowed in the morning, fingers crossed, I will definitely be taking a morning bath tomorrow. Cup of coffee on the side table, some music playing, lovely. I recognize that all of our stories this week do a bit of reparenting, reclaiming some basic moments and parts of the day, bathing, eating, watching the sun come up, and infusing them with extra loving kindness for self, gentle guardianship of self. And if that feels like something you could use more of, you can start just by noticing how you interact with yourself. In difficult, low moments, in happier moments, just step back a bit and be the presence that watches. What are your go-to responses to self? And once you know them, you can evaluate how helpful or not they are and begin to practice other ways. I speak from experience that with time, this can make your days softer and healthier. Oh, thank you for being here with me today. Wherever you are, I wish you an imperfect, beautiful day, many dried beans, and snow at just the right time.